Hello. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for coming and joining us in this evening and waiting for all our technical issues. I wanted to do this talk. GraphQL is pretty old now, like it's been around for some time, but I recently started a job 5 months ago, and they gave me a list of technologies of things that I needed to learn, and GraphQL was one of them. I did not, to be fair, actually look at the technology before starting the job. So when I was in the job, there's quite a lot of their services that they use, and they use GraphQL. So fumbled my way through, but decided that I needed to take some time. So as most presenters do, if you want to learn a new technology, prepare a talk about it. So that's what I'm doing. My name is Ruddy, and this is what I do. So the job that I got 5 months ago is working at TES. TES is a UK-based company, so I get to work remotely, yay. Really enjoy it. It's basically a digital education company that has a single mission, which is a great teacher for every child. And a lot of the people that work there genuinely believe that. And genuinely because it's false. But they believe in it, and they pour their hearts into the work that they do, which is very exciting. So having to work for that is pretty cool. If I'm not doing that, I'm a facilitator / mentor at Umuzi. It's an organization that helps or provides young people with digital skills so that they can do some digital work, and they try to bridge a gap between unemployment, bridge the gap in unemployment in South Africa. So it's pretty awesome. And if I'm not doing that, I run an organization called Pink IT with amazing humans who help me each and every single day to get a lot of women into software development. And I understand that this is what I do and not who I am. So that's not interesting. The only thing that I discovered about myself just this weekend is that I love cake. And just like every other person who's in South Africa that loves papa and umkhodu, right? I really love cake, as in traveling at a petrol station with a Woolworths kind of I love cake. So that was something I discovered by myself that was new. All right, so what is GraphQL? All right, so as I learned the technology, right, obviously you want to find definitions about what it is and what people consider it to be and things that are fun. So apologies, my presentations are not as structured as Nika's one, and I have been doing this for some time now, so I'm sorry. First thing is that it was founded at Facebook. So Facebook has quite a lot of systems, I'm sure, and services and stuff like that. And so they decided to create this specification called GraphQL. So my specification is a set of requirements that you need to meet so that you can achieve something, right? And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But it's also a query language. So in a query language, I think SQL and things like that. So you use queries to achieve these sets of requirements. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's also flexible, or in its definition has the concept of flexibility. And what that means, well, after discovering it and reading stuff, is that it's actually from a front-end perspective, right? You are given the single endpoint, and you can call and provide, certain responses that you want in the single query, right? So the flexibility comes from there. But they have a strict type system. So I'm flexible, but they have a strict type system. I'm like, okay. And this is their schema definition language, and it serves as a contract between the client and the server. So you provide types queries, mutations, subscriptions, and things like that. And this serves as a contract to your front-end developer so that they can code against the server, right? Contrary to popular belief, the graph part of GraphQL doesn't actually mean that it's associated to any graph, right? It talks about how it crawls an API from the directories, the fields and subfields of that API to find out information or resolve the fields. And the query part is the query language, or the QL part is a query language. All right, so that's the definition of what GraphQL is, and I hope that makes sense. All right, so in South Africa, right, we have been working with SOAP for some time. So anyone who's worked in the bank knows that SOAP hasn't died yet. And we have, and now we're moving to REST, and a lot of our services use REST, and we're pretty excited about it, but we're still using SOAP. So now we've got this new thing that's coming up called GraphQL, and I'm like, are we trying to maybe make REST obsolete? I don't think so. And the nicest thing about GraphQL is that you can build it on top of any REST API. And maybe it is trying to replace REST. I don't know. But with a show of hands, who actually has worked with GraphQL? And okay, so you guys know what GraphQL is. It's pretty exciting. All right, cool. Now let's take an example. Right, we have a post in Instagram. I follow Cosmopolitan South Africa, and they've got this post that comes from this girl's page, the ladies or woman's page, the Ebony Falcon, right? And that comes from Twitter. And then at the bottom here, we can see some likes, some comments. We're very familiar with Instagram, right? So go with me in this journey, right? I would assume, for example, that some of these images that Cosmopolitan has stored lives in some type of database somewhere, right? And if we are bad at this as much as we are, like comments and likes might be living in a Redis or RabbitMQ store somewhere, right? And then we might have the emoji kind of application that Instagram doesn't have inherently, so they use like a third API to actually get like emojis onto their app. So in order for this kind of picture in my feed to show up on Instagram, multiple things need to be contacted. The service, the Redis store, what is this? Some third API and other services that they might have to make it possible. This is really daunting for some of our applications. Maybe a website might have a lot of like network and bandwidth, but for mobiles, data is not cheap, right? And things die out. So the idea is that we can provide one endpoint and then make these calls and requests and then bring only the necessary information to the user. And this is what GraphQL tries to do. All right, so a REST version of what we just saw to make that Instagram post possible, right, is we've got our desktop and our mobile. We go and get information from Redis. We go and get information from Postgres and some other API. And like API, this world could be intense. Like it could be other services on top of other services just to get the information that we need, right? This is a GraphQL version of it. It says, all your applications, so your desktop and your mobile, will only have one endpoint. And when you reach that, and in that endpoint, you can provide a certain schema of the data that you want every single time you call this endpoint, right? GraphQL sits somewhere in your server somewhere and then does all these calls for you and resolves all this information and gives it back to you when you request it. Does that make sense? Awesome. Now, the things that GraphQL tries to achieve or tries to solve is the concept of over and under fetching, right? So with our REST APIs, and I don't know how many of you guys have had this experience, right? You have a REST API that is probably developed according to like a schema that is in the back end somewhere, and it just gives you information that you don't necessarily need at that particular time. You might just want the user's name, but not necessarily their address or things like that. And so that's the overfetching part. The underfetching thing is that you might want more information, but this REST API only provides you like a bit of the information that you require. So you now need to make another call to get the rest of the information and things like that. So because in GraphQL you can like structure your response or what you want from this endpoint, you can tell it what you need and what you don't need. All right. It tries to solve the N+1 problem. What is that? Now, for a query to happen like that post that we just did, right? The comment from Instagram. Let's say you are fetching the content, and for each and every one of those content there's comments, and in those comments there's names of users, right? If you just fetch the information, you are going to get the information about Cosmopolitan as a user in Instagram. You're going to fetch all the comments that is required for that are part of this post, but for each and every one of those comments you need to go do a fetch to get the information about the user who posted the comment. This is a lot of trips to your server, and it's pretty much expensive, and you don't necessarily want to do that. Facebook came with the concept of data loader. And this is basically using batching and caching to kind of help you in making your request. So batching, it goes and gets all the information that you need from your services, right? And tries to cache this information for you so that the next time you want to make a similar trip, it already has that information for you. Right. It has charts and analytics, right? And why do you need to have this is that sometimes a resolver, for example, that resolves your fields in the query language, you want to find out whether some things are taking longer, shorter, and try to help or like mitigate those bottlenecks. So GraphQL gives you like these nice graphs and analytics tools to make that possible. Another thing is that because we change so many things in the front end, right, it's easier for you to make those iterations because you just control like the response that you want from your API. So next moment in your front end, you have a field of an address. Next time you don't, and all you need to do is just remove the address from the request and the endpoint. What is also nice is that after a long time, if ever you've like designed something and it's no longer used, it'll tell you that that thing is not used anymore, so you can remove it without having any issues or any breakage in your current front end. Right, and also the SDL part, which is the schema definition language, right? It provides you a contract with your client, between the client and the server. So all the front-end developers can continue with their work without having to worry about what's happening in the backend. And when the backend is ready, it's just plug and play. So that's pretty cool. Right. So I know I talk a lot and I'm quite tired. So if you guys want to take anything out of this talk, it's pretty much these 5 things. And I'm going to cover GraphQL from a very high level, right? One of them is the schema, right, that we talked about, which is the contract that we're going to walk through, and I'm going to explain how it looks like. A resolver, right? Number 3, it's queries, mutations, and subscriptions. We are going to talk about each and every one of them in detail and how they look like, but just look at this and like memorize it, capture it. Okay. The schema. Right, I like this quote as I was going through Medium. I went through really other cool websites like How to GraphQL and things like that. And they say this, or like, yeah, design your schema based on how data is used, not based on how it's stored, which is the issue that I explained a little bit earlier on about underfetching and overfetching, for example. If you know that you're going to need this information, and people might not favor this concept, right? But you have the ability to do this and like be more efficient in how you actually query information into your from your server. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that REST is not a bad protocol specification, right? Because we have smart developers out there, and a lot of people have found certain ways of dealing with some of the issues that I mentioned, which is overfetching and underfetching, right? Or like other issues that I mentioned. Like we have OData, if you really want to use a query language that is built on top of REST. We've got JSON schema if you really want to use a schema for your REST API. So it's not that you have to use GraphQL. People have found solutions to still use REST with different types of other tools that sit on top of REST, right? Just as an FYI, right? Schema, right? The second part is our resolvers. A resolver is a function in GraphQL server that is responsible for fetching a data for a single field. This is very important, right? So this is the field that we have, quotes, right? And this is our resolver. So our resolver will do all the magic that it needs to do. Remember, GraphQL needs to like go and fetch information there and go fetch information there and get fetch information there to make one field possible, right? So your resolvers are basically in the instructions and the soldiers that you send in to go and get that information for you. So you will provide your functions, your methods, and everything that you want to do here to resolve whatever field that is being queried. Does that make sense? All right. Queries. So each and everything that you have to do, that you use, like that it has to be available into your contract or your schema. So this is a definition of how you will define a query inside your schema. Type, query, and whatever the query is. For example, here we've got quotes. We're going to see this in detail. And quotes actually returns an array of quotes, and quotes is just an object that returns a message and an author and an ID, right? So now in your resolver, you go to that query and say, hey, this is the query that someone is going to use, and they're going to call quotes. When they call this query, go and get me all the quotes. And quotes could be a database, quote could be a data, like a data store, an object, or anything that you want it to be. All right, and how do you use this? This is the usage. So you would give it the keyword, which is query, and what you want, which query that you actually want to query, because there could be a list of queries. and then in there you provide the information that you need, so the fields that you want it to respond with, right? And I'll give you an example as well. So if you only want the messages, you can just put messages and it'll return messages back. If you want messages and author, then you can provide these two fields and it'll give those fields back to you, right? The fourth thing, mutations. This is how you will define your mutations inside your schema. So type, mutation, and whatever the mutation is. Yes, and you guessed it, mutation, it changes data. So if you want to add anything into your database or things like that, you'll use this. If you want to provide some fields, you'll provide fields like this and give it type. It uses exclamation marks to say that this thing is required. So when you create your mutation, you have to provide a string value of message and an author value of string, because these things are required. How would you use it? Usage. You provide the keyword, which is mutation, and which mutation you're actually interested in, the required field, and the response that you want to have back after you have mutated something. The last thing, subscriptions. Subscriptions are things that you use to monitor if an event has happened, and when that event happens, you want to know about it, so you subscribe to it. Again, there's other technologies that you can do to achieve the same thing, but GraphQL also provides this for you. You'll define a subscription like this, the type, which is subscription, and we know that it's strictly typed. This is how you need to always specify your schema. And the resolver, this is how a subscription resolver would look like. So we've got subscription, and PubSub is a published subscription factory that Apollo provides for you. And then the async iterator is basically a function that asynchronously listens to your events, whatever event that it is. All right. So yeah, this is the last part, which is subscriptions. In this journey of figuring out what GraphQL is, I know I found out that it was made open source in 2015, but this website is pretty awesome. Reason being is that, okay, so you'll go through all the theory before you get to this part, but it shows you what kind of technologies that it works with from the front end, and then other technologies that it works with in the back end. And there's a lot of information. Like in GraphQL and Node alone, there is Graph.js that was created by Facebook, Graph Yoga that is built on top of Express, Apollo, which is the one that we're using, and the reason why I chose Apollo is because the company that I work for uses it, so I needed to learn these technologies, so this is what I'm doing. And yeah, so if you want to check anything out, go to this website. Pretty awesome. So yeah, let's jump into our demo. I'm not brave like Nico, so I'm not going to really code live. I'm not going to test the demo gods like that. All right, let's do this. Okay, so we're gonna start on the server. Nope. Everyone can see that, right? Everyone good? All right, you can't see, sorry. Is that better? Awesome. Okay, so my server is pretty simple. All right, you've got all your node modules after install, but I'm going to first pay attention to our package.json. There's pretty much two dependencies, right? Yes, this is going to go and get other dependencies in your node module, will be gigantic, but these are the two things that are important that you need just to get a server up and running, right? Apollo data source REST. I still do believe that I can do this with request from Node. Try to do it, took me long, so I just bailed out. And then Apollo server, which we're gonna go and talk about now. All right, this is my server. All right, I import all the libraries and packages that I'm gonna use, and this is my schema. All right, schema, you have to use GraphQL, which comes from the Apollo server. This also provided a lot of complexity for me because they removed GraphQL from Apollo Client, and now you needed to go and get it in GraphText. But yeah, I'm just all right. So yes, you provide GraphQL and provide the schema. Inside the schema, this is how you would use your comments. Instead of forward slashes or forward slash and a star, you use hashtags. And this is my first type. I've got a type called quotes. Right, that takes in, that has an ID, a message, and an author. I've got a query. The first query is quotes that returns an array of quotes, so it'll bring back this like an array of these, right? And then I've got best quotes, which is a third-party library that I imported into my application, so I can show you how you can, in one single GraphQL, be able to go get information from a different source and get information from another different source. And all of this just works in your schema, all right? So that's my query. My mutation is create a query, where I pass in a message and the author. And then I've got a subscription, so that when something happens, when a query is being created, I want to be notified of it, all right? And then in order for me to use this third API, it was very, very, very complex, because the data that they return is very, very complex. And I've got it somewhere. No, I removed it because I restarted this. That's fine. Okay, so that's my, okay. And then the third party API brings back content, and content is a content type, which is an object. That object takes in quotes and copyright, because yes, it's not mine, and that brings in an array of random quotes. Random quotes is an object that takes in quotes and all of these things, and this is how basically you build your structure. So if ever you find an API that returns this gigantic information, this is how you would define it in your schema. Does that make sense? Everything. All right, cool. So we've got our schema on lockdown. That's number one. All right, so I've got a UID generator here because I needed to generate my IDs. I've got, yes, so this is my quote, which is just an array of objects. It could be a database, it could be anything, but like, who's got the time? And then the second thing is resolvers. Resolvers, you've got your query, we've seen this. I resolve the quotes, which basically brings back this data array object that you see over here. And then the best quote, which is going to go into best quotes API, use the API that I've got over here, and then return back some information. All right, so that's the second query that I have. In my subscriptions, I've got the subscriber, which is called quote added. Let's go to my subscription here. You can see that quote added is actually the thing that I provided into my schema. Right, and then that will return a pub/sub async iteration that uses this. So this is just a label. It could be like a string of some sort, which here it's actually a string. But yeah, you can pass it a label so that you know which subscription that is actually being generated. And then my mutation, right? In a mutation, this is how resolvers work. You have a parent class. Arguments, so parent, which resolves the actual calling function, which is a mutation. Arguments, whatever arguments that you're passing in. The context, which is shared across all queries in GraphQL, and information, which provides the status of that resolver. All right, so right here I'm just taking in arguments, whatever arguments, which would be message and author, and returning that back. Here I'm pushing it into my data that we saw at the top, which is just an array of objects, and here I'm calling my subscription so that it tells me that, hey, your data has been created. All right, okay, cool. So, and this here, I create my server. So Apollo server, you provide the definition, which is the schema. If we go up here, it's the dude over there. And then your resolvers and your data sources. I need my data sources to resolve my third API, all right? And here I just launch my server. So if you see in my terminal, obviously that you're not gonna see, but believe me when I say I started it at port 4000 for everybody who's at the back, all right? And if we go here, we can see the server live, all right? So let's go. Query. Remember, when we want to specify our query from the front end, we need to provide the keyword, which is query. We need to provide whatever query that we want, what we're interested in this case, quotes, and I want you to return messages. So this is going to return an array of messages, and in it, it'll have message and it'll have author. If I'm not interested in the author, I can just remove this and call this function again, and it'll only return messages to me. So you understand how this is like glorious and gold for all front-end developers. Like when I don't want information, I can just remove it from my query, and when I want it, I add it back, and then magically or automatically it comes back to me. All right. Second one is I'd like to mutate some stuff. Sorry. That is also dark. Can everyone see? Sorry. Wider. Oh yeah, no, I don't know if I can do that here, unfortunately. Sorry. Can I? Let's try that. Okay, theme, dark. Can we just say light? Save settings. Yep. Oh, there we go. Okay. Lovely. Thanks, guys. So there you go. You've got a mutation. So you provide the keyword, which is mutation. In there, you create a quote, the mutation that you want, which is create quotes, and provide the information that is required, which is the message and the author, which are both type string. If I go and mutate this data, I've got my ID returned back and the author, which is Rudes, right? But we have another thing that we've got up our sleeve, which is a subscription. So I can start the subscription, and then it tells you that it's listening, right? Because it's going to run in the background and it's waiting for an event to happen. If I go back here and I change my message to fun times and test, and then run this again and go back to my quote, you can see that it has returned a message, and the message of the things that I've just put in on the last time, because I told it needs to return a message. So now this thing is going to listen to any creation of my quotes and then tell me that, okay, hey, a new quote has been created and this is the message that this person has put in, which I think is super cool, but okay. All right, so I created this nice API with so many nice colors for you guys to see, and now we're going to consume our GraphQL in our client side. Yeah, so we're done with the server because like we're badass. Sorry, can I say that? All right, and this is our client. All right. First thing that we're interested in is our query string. Remember, we have a query that is called quotes, and quotes returns an array of quotes. In the front end, I need libraries. Okay, cool. So also a point of contention because people might feel a little bit different about this. I used React because also the company that I work for uses React. So I work with React a lot every single day. So I also needed to learn how to do this in React. That's the first part. The second part is that I really did not want to do this without a web framework because I'm not sure if it's possible, and I really didn't want the headache. So I just like plug and play. And that's my excuse. All right. And I used hooks. And a lot of people do functional components and keeping them clean and don't want to mix state with components. Yes, I understand. I believe that is wise. But this is a little bit clean for me nonetheless. And there's multiple things that you can use if you don't want to use React hooks, like queries and tags. So Apollo provides like query tags if you want to use queries. So you don't necessarily have to use the hook that they have. And if you don't want to use that, there's also like high order components that you can use, and it really decouples your GraphQL requests, and you can use that. So that's like the three options that I found, and maybe there's more. So yeah, this is how you would define your schema in your front end. So now we're in the front end. My brains and minds are in the front end. You provide the quotes that you need, what the query that you're interested in. In this case, it's quotes, and the information that you want back. Right. If you call use query, again, it's a hook that Apollo provides for us. It'll give you this information, which is the loading information, which is a Boolean value, either true or false. So when it's done, it's false, and then when it's still doing, it's true. And then an error message. So this is also another problem with GraphQL, is that unlike traditional REST APIs, it does not return like statuses that we know, like your 400s and whatever. When you request a request in GraphQL, it'll give you a 200, but it will give you an error object inside of it, and that will give you some details of what that error is. And maybe that's not so nice, but like yeah, it's an option. Right, so error, if that has resolved nicely, you get all your data back. And in here, I'm just like pulling in the data into this nice UI because I'm like dope with UI. And this is the quotes that you see all here at the bottom. So obviously my favorite one is like work hard, get paid, buy KFC, open it in a taxi so that everyone can smell your success. Because it's so great. Right, and if someone is already shopping for Christmas for me, right, my size is window seats in plain ticket sizes. So yeah, all right, so we've got that, and we've got our query, and we've got magic happening in the front end. If you want to do or add something, right, this is how you would specify your mutation into your front end. Again, the query keyword. This is just basically like what you want to name the mutation that you want. again, this is our creation mutation, and you provided the fields that you need. So in this case, a string, this, okay, let me just go here, no, let's see. We've called it something else. All right, so yeah, and it will take in, again, message and author, and this is what you pass into query. We've already seen this in our GraphQL, right? But that's basically how you would use it. And in add quotes, another hook that Apollo gives us, which is use mutation, and all you need to do is just call the mutation that you need. It will give you whatever creation quote that you are looking for, or in this case, hey, go and call creation query with the data. All right. Here I did some funky stuff because I use state to go and get information from the front end. And this is basically this piece that you see at the top here. So I can say fun times again, and in here go Ruddy, and then add that. So you don't see anything at the bottom, but if I refresh my screen, you now see fun times Ruddy. All right, and this is basically done here. So those two, text boxes are here. I set message from use state, and I set author, right, and those fields are set. And then I've got a function that I called add new quote, and in here I take in the variables that I need, which is message and author from the use state, and then that calls our quotes and everything happens. Right, and yeah, the third part would be subscriptions. Subscriptions in the front end, again, provide the keyword subscription, what kind of subscription I want, and the information that will be returned in the subscription when magic has happened. And I see now I've got a console log that has got test, so let's remove that. And then, yeah, in there you've got another, hook that Apollo provides us called use subscription. You call the subscription with loading and the data that it resolves to, right? And yeah, so this is how my application works, and yeah, this is my 2 cents about GraphQL. So yeah, thank you guys. Any questions?